Hi, everyone, and welcome to Walter's Wives and Woes.
I'm Shelby.
And I'm Marissa, and we are
The
the
Walters
Walters Girls. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Walter's Wives and Woes. This is the first episode of a 3-part series where Shelby will be sharing a large part of her story. This episode is titled, I'm Going to Marry Him. But before we begin, we want to give a trigger warning for this episode and for the entire series. We'll be discussing experiences related to abusive relationships, which may be distressing for some listeners. Please take care of yourself, and if you need to, feel free to pause or skip this episode. If you or someone you know needs support, we'll include resources in the show notes. And also, we are always here for any help whatsoever. So, Shelby, share your story.
That's like, okay. Just so everyone knows, I'm kind of dreading this. So,
Do you need me to ease you into it a little bit?
I mean, I don't know. There's no easing into any of it. This, I don't want to say it's a large part of my story, but it is a part of my story. And it was about 6 years of my life.
6.5.
Okay, 6.5, give or take. So it can be triggering for even me to talk about. But
There's a burp. Stop. It was rumbling. Okay.
But I plan to be as transparent as possible. But also know there's a lot of like those 6.5 years that I don't remember. And there could be things that like Marissa shares that I'm like, yeah, I don't remember that. Because as I've learned after separating myself from the situation, that my coping mechanism was to just block certain things out. So I will start in the beginning. I won't name drop. We are from a small town though, so if you know me, you probably know who I'm talking about. I started dating my ex when I think I was 20, right before I turned 21. It all started, he came up to Bowling Green with one of my best friends. She's still one of my best friends. She was in my wedding. She had brought him up because they were friends and they had actually attended the same college before she transferred to BG. But she brought him up and we were tailgating for a football game. And it was just a good time. We were all having a lot of fun. And this guy, my ex, was flirting with me hardcore all day. Because we were both from like the same, not the same small town, but like the same county, which is essentially like the same small town. I had heard some things of his past. He actually dated one of my really good friends in high school, her older sister. So like him and I had crossed paths before, and I just kind of thought he was bad news bears. But all day he was just flirting with me, blah, blah, blah. I was friendly, like not a big deal. And then later that night, he was like trying to stay at my apartment. And I was like, no, not happening. He pulled some like slick moves. He actually left his phone in my car on purpose. And I got a phone call from my friend. Like, this is, of course, like 3 or 4 in the morning after the bars had closed. And I dropped them off and went back home, and I was expecting her to pick up, and it was him, and he's like, hey, I think I forgot my phone in your car. And I'm like, oh, how convenient. So I took the phone back over and he's like, can I just like stay at your place? And I'm like, no, you cannot. Like, I was not into him at all, not interested, whatever. So that's kind of how this all started. He essentially would not leave me alone. He attempted to visit me at work, and my friend Carly was like, look, if you want any chance with this girl, you are not going to visit her at work. Like, that's going to freak her out.
You name drop Carly. Do you want to re-say that?
No, it's
Okay.
Carly, whatever. And so anyway, this like went on for like 2 or 3 weeks where he just was blowing me up. And it got to the point where I was like, this guy's like not leaving me alone. And that probably should have been a red flag right there. Like, I said no, and the answer is no. But of course, I like chalk it up to like, oh, he's persistent. Like, and
Hindsight's 2020.
hindsight is really 2020. And I was actually at one of my other friends' house and we were kind of talking about it. And she's like, you know what? Just go on a date with him. It's not like you're going to marry him. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm going to go on a date with him to shut him up. Like, that was my game plan. So he lived back home. So I came home over fall break and I was staying at my parents' house. And I told them, I was like, I actually have a date tonight. And they're like, oh, really? With who? Like, they were kind of excited, I think. And I told them, and I will never forget my dad's response. He looks at me and he goes, you're going on a date with the boy, his last name. And I was like, yeah. And I could just tell, like, he was not amused. And I remember saying, like, Dad, I'll be home in an hour and a half. Like, it's not going to go anywhere. So I go over to this guy's house and he really pulls the moves. His dad owns a pretty big horse ranch, essentially. And he's like, we're going to go horseback riding. And I remember going over there and I'm like, I am not going to look cute. Like, I didn't do my hair. I didn't do my makeup. My hair was up in a ponytail. I had on like a t-shirt and jeans and these like combat boots. Like, I was like, this guy, I am not doing anything to make him interested in me. And I remember pulling up in my little Chevy Cobalt and getting out, and I still remember what he was wearing. He was wearing a red cutoff shirt, his high school, dirty work jeans, and boots. And at the time, he was very attractive, very like muscular and ripped. And I remember stepping out of my car and thinking, oh, looks kind of cute. And that is where it all went downhill. And so we went horseback riding. He put me on his stud and he was riding around a mare. And, we just horseback rode around his ranch or farm, whatever you want to call it. It's not like we live in Texas or anything. And we had a really good time. And we were heading back up to his house. And of course, I'm on a stud. And obviously, a stud is an uncut male horse. So they've still got testosterone. They still got their balls, essentially. And the stud took off towards the house running. I'm not a horse girl. And I'm like freaking out. And he's behind me, like, pull on the reins, pull on the reins. And I am pulling on the reins. And nothing's happening. The stud is just like still taking off. And he comes up galloping beside me on his horse and he grabs the reins. And I'm not kidding you when I say he almost yanked the horse to the ground. He almost yanked the horse to the ground. This is like I don't know
2,000-pound
2,000-pound horse. Yeah. And the horse stops. And I'm just like, oh my God, my knight in shining armor. Like literally, this is what's running through my head. I mean, it was very attractive. And of course, I jump off the horse right away, and that was it for horseback riding. I was like, I'm not doing that again. And so he's like, well, do you want to go out for dinner? And I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Um, and so we just went up to the Black Angus. That was when it was at its old location on Main Street. And we had dinner and just kind of like talked and got to know each other. And then we went back to his house and we did not do it. I'm not that kind of girl. But I just remember thinking like, oh my God, like I feel like I was falling in love with him in that date. I don't know how else to describe it. Um, and by this point, it's like, I don't even know what time it is. It's like midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I have no idea. And I was like, I have to go home. And I went home that night, and my mom was actually waiting up for me. And I walked in the door, and she's like, so, how did it go? And I will never forget what I told her. I said, I'm going to marry him. I was for certain, like, he was my future husband. Um, and that is when this whole like love affair took off. I was completely obsessed with him. He, as far as I knew, was completely obsessed with me. We talked every day. He came, like, we were an item at that point. And he came up and visited me in Bowling Green. And I would come home and see him. Like, we spent a lot of time together those first couple of months. And then out of nowhere, he broke up with me. Like, just one day, broke up with me. And I have never like sat, laid, I guess, essentially in bed crying over a man like I did him. I felt sick. I felt like I couldn't go on because I was like, he is the love of my life and we're not together anymore. I mean, it was just like, I don't know how else to explain it other than like I was completely and utterly heartbroken. And so for like the next several months, we weren't together and he was seeing other girls, blah, blah, blah. And that following summer, I don't know, he contacted me and we hung out. I should say we were always in touch.
He could never completely let you go.
Yes. Yeah. Like that's just him in general. And then that next summer, we actually hung out and we started like dating again. And it was right before my best friend's wedding because I remember at her bachelorette party that we were kind of like talking again, and everyone's like, really? Like, you're talking to him again? And it was just kind of like, yeah, like, I don't know where it's going to go. But I remember just thinking, like, okay, this is what was supposed to happen. Like, we're supposed to be together. I am completely head over here. Like that entire time we weren't together, I was completely 100% head over heels in love with him. I did not talk to anyone else. I did not date anyone else. Like he still took up so much space in my head. And so we got back together and we dated that second time for I don't know how many months, like probably 6 or 7 months. And during that time, like he definitely started to like show a little bit more of his true colors. And what I mean by that is like there were a couple nights where I would try to get a hold of him and he wouldn't respond until the next day.
Mhm.
And he would just be like, oh, I fell asleep, or oh, I was out with friends, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, okay. And so that next time, um, like we met each other's families, like it was more serious than like the first couple of months. And then in March, this is when Snapchat still showed your best friends. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It used to show your top 3.
Yep.
And I remember questioning him because his top 3, there was this girl on there. And I was
Oh
just,
my God, I forgot about her.
mm-hmm.
Mm.
And I was like, hey, what is this? Like, what's going on here? I looked her up. I was somehow able to look her up. I'm a private investigator, by the way. And I was like, who is this? And he just kind of played it off like it was no big deal.
Like, she's obsessed with me. We're
Yeah.
just friends.
Yeah, everyone was obsessed with him.
Yeah.
And I can't really tell you why we broke up that time, other than like just a bunch of different things. Like, I had a feeling he was cheating on me. He was talking to other girls, obviously. And it just kind of like fizzled out. And then shortly after that, he started dating this girl.
Mm-hmm. But
And
he would never admit that he dated her.
well, they made it serious eventually, like on Facebook.
Am I thinking of the same person?
Oh, no, that was during that time too, but no, like it was
Okay.
her. So anyway, um, he started dating this girl that was on his Snapchat stories, and like she's claiming like he's the love of her life, blah blah blah. And again, it wrecks me. But I'm like, all right, I'm gonna try and move on. I was talking to some people. I actually went on a couple dates, but he was always like, again, in my mind, like,
Stalking his Facebook.
yes, like
Yes.
constantly checking in on him because during this time, he still communicates with me.
Mm-hmm.
Still checks in every now and then, basically to like, I don't know. I don't know what it was. Basically to make sure I was still there, I think. And then, so that was in March. And then fast forward to November of that year, I ran into him at my hometown bar, Thanksgiving Eve night. And they were still dating. And we ran into each other at the bar. And then I left, and he either got a hold of my friend that I was hanging out with that night or somehow, but anyway, he shows up at my friend's house where I was. And we start talking. And then I went back to his house, and one thing leads to the next. And basically, he's telling me this entire time, like, I've been trying to break up with her, but she's crazy. She's like saying all these crazy things. Like, if I break up with her, he's like, but I've been trying to end it type thing. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And so essentially, he breaks up with her then, and we get back together. And he leaves for, do you remember this part? He goes to Cancun like a couple weeks later. And during that time, she calls me and is like, hey, I think he's seen both of us still. So even though they broke up on Facebook, like he was still seeing her. And she's like telling me all of this. And of course, I don't want to believe it. Like, I'm just like, okay, yeah. I did call him and confront him while he was in Cancun. And I'm like, I can't do this. And he's like crying and sobbing and blah, blah, blah.
His go-to.
And then like he is on, I have to win Shelby back mode. And so that entire time he's on vacation, he's not leaving me alone. She was actually supposed to go on vacation with him because she had already paid for her trip. And then he doesn't take her. He actually wanted to take me, but I didn't have my passport. So he went with his dad and stepmom at the time. And So anyway, he comes home and it is all like, I've got to convince Shelby that this girl's crazy and blah, blah, blah. So he convinces me. And that is when we start dating for like the next 4.5 years, essentially. Um, there was a lot of breaking up, a lot of getting back together, but we are consistently together for like 4.5 years, as in everyone knows we're together.
Yeah, including his parents. Like
Mm-hmm.
they broke up so much that for the longest time it was not on Facebook.
Yeah.
Because it would have been humiliating for Shelby and him to change their status literally every couple of days.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, we start dating again, and at this time I'm wrapping up my master's program in Toledo. So I was done in May.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the May, I essentially moved back home and moved in with him. And we lived in this crap hole, first of all. And that is when the abuse started. And when I say abuse, I mean, at this point, the financial abuse starts.
Mm-hmm.
So he paid our rent. Mind you, it was $300 a month, and he split it with our roommate. So he was paying $150. And I had to pay everything else. Food, TV bill, everything. Like our food bill alone, I would spend $150 a week because he had to have fresh veggies every week and protein. So like easily I'm spending a lot more money. He was notorious for making me pay for dinners because he was giving me a place to live. That's what he would tell me.
I'm sorry to interject. One thing I always remember is when we would go out to eat, he never would offer to pay for mom and dad's meal. He would like wait to see if mom and dad were going to pay for your guys' food.
Well, and half the time he would, quote unquote, forget his wallet.
Freaking loser.
Yes. Mind you, he was very financially secure, as in he had a lot more money than I did.
And he loved to talk about how much money he had.
Yes, like he's all about money. So that's when the financial abuse started. And then,
wait, before we get into like other abuse, I think before we get into that, I want to say at this time, I hated him. I don't ever remember a time where I did not hate him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just want to add that. And at this time, like Shelby was living back home, but she never saw us.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have been, yeah, because we missed some stuff. Because you moved back home, we missed when I came home that night from work.
Mm-hmm.
So Shelby and I lived together my first year of college when she was doing her master's program. And when they got back together, like a big thing happened. So I hated him. He was, he cheated on her.
Yeah, at this point, we think he's just cheated on me.
We think he's just cheated. We didn't realize, the full extent of it. And we both, Shelby and I, worked at the same place in Findlay. We were servers, and him being his charming self came up one night and put flowers on Shelby's windshield. And I had to work the late shift. I don't really remember what happened after he put flowers on her windshield because I just remember seeing red and crap talking, I would say the other word, to one of our friends that we worked with. And I was like, oh, God, like, how dare he come up here? I ended up working super late that night. I think it was like 4:30 whenever I got home. And what really ticks me off is I called Shelby on my way home. There was construction at one of the bridges. And I remember this like it was yesterday. Like I'm shaking talking about it. And I was like,
It's not funny, but
hey, I'm on my way home now. Just want to let you know. And she was like, okay, I might be in bed by the time you get home. So I get home and I like went into her room to see if she was still awake or something. And he's in her bed. And I see red. When I say I hate this guy, that is not a strong enough word. I would kill over, like, because of him.
it's not funny.
It's not funny, but that night, I flipped the lights on. I marched right over to him, stood above him. Like, this guy at the time easily had 80, 90 pounds on me. And I'm screaming at him, get out of my house. Saying way worse things, though. And he's like, you're not going to talk to me like that. I'm like, oh, really? I'm not going to talk to you like that. As I'm standing over him and I tell him, I will never forget this. I'm like, you're lucky I don't get a rusty kitchen knife and slit your throat. And Shelby's bawling. Marissa, stop. And he was like, get away from me. And I'm like, get out of my house. And she's like, just stop. Like, that's the closest I ever came to committing murder. Maybe second closest. No, I think that's number one. And so I went into my room and I couldn't sleep. I'm blowing up my then boyfriend, now husband, who's in high school, calling him at 4:30 in the morning because I was just so mad. And of course he doesn't answer. So then I'm ticked at him and want to break up with him because he's not there when I need him. Literally. And then Shelby crawls into my bed. I don't know why I keep going back to him. And I was like, Shelby, I don't know either. I'm like, I think I remember calling her weak. I think I remember saying, you are so weak and you need to be stronger. And looking back, like, very poor choice of words because no amount of, it's not really strength. It's trying to break free from a situation like that is a lot harder than I ever would have known at that time. But yeah, so all that's happening, that pretty much was the beginning of Shelby and I's relationship really separating. She moved out, left all of her things at my house except for her bed and some clothes. I kid you not. She left everything, which ticked me off even more. And that was in the fall. Wait, no. Yeah?
I don't remember.
Her crap was in my house for a good 6 months. I ended up that happened way before me and Derek got married. He was still in high school, so that would have been in the spring.
Okay.
And then in the fall, we got married.
Well, you didn't get married with Derek right out of high school.
Oh, yeah. What happened? Well, literally, your stuff was still there by that point.
It might have been.
It was because, no, it was, my memory sucks. 3 kids and 10 years later.
Yeah.
No, Derek and I were engaged because he basically lived with me his freshman year of college. And we moved your stuff into the spare room and my stuff into the bedroom. So yeah, Shelby and I basically did not talk. But she was back home living with him, and we never saw her. Mom and Dad never saw her. Never saw her. So, all that to say, Shelby, you can talk about the next step. I'm so mad talking about this. Why did we do this so late? Because I'm not going to be able to sleep.
Don't worry, I'll have nightmares tonight.
Great. You were the one that wanted to do this.
You literally put it on, without even asking me.
I'm sorry.
So don't blame this on me.
Hey, at the beginning of the podcast, you said you were willing to talk about it. Before we ever started our podcast, you said you were willing to talk about it.
I know.
So here we are. Let's just get the thing over with.
So, yeah, needless to say, that's when the isolation also started to occur. He did not want to spend time with my family. More so like my sister at the time. Like he still had my parents fooled at this time.
I wouldn't say completely,
Yeah.
but they hadn't like witnessed everything and we didn't tell them everything. And
Yeah.
he didn't like how I called him out on all of his lies.
Yeah. Yep. He definitely doesn't like a straight shooter.
No, and he was scared of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
He should have been. Still should be. I hope you're listening to this, you mother effer.
So, yeah, needless to say, during that time, you can't be a good friend. You can't be a good sister. You can't be a good daughter. You can't be anything because you're trying to make him happy.
Be the best for him.
Yeah. And he is a full-blown narcissist. Still to this day, I think he's a narcissist. But so that all happened. And again, I'm sure there was a lot of other things that happened during that time period that I don't remember. It's honestly all kind of a blur. But I remember that late fall, early winter, is when the physical abuse started to happen. So up until this point, he had never laid a hand on me, ever.
Well, how long have you guys been together at this point?
So we had gotten back together that November.
Okay, so about a year.
Yeah, so about a year into it, maybe
And
a little bit more.
You guys had only been living together for how long?
We would have moved in together like that summer.
So a few months.
I think. Yeah.
Living together for a few months.
Yes. So that fall/winter, I don't know when this happened. Like
rodeo
I know
season.
It was rodeo season. His dad owned, his dad has since passed. But his dad owned the rodeo back home. And he like lived for the rodeo because one, he could get belligerent drunk, and two, he thought he was somebody at the rodeo because he thought he was a cowboy. Anyway, so at some point, he liked to have parties at our house. Like that is why he moved into this house and out of his dad's house, because he wanted to be able to throw parties and his dad was not allowing it since his dad got back with his stepmom. So really that's the whole reason why he moved out. Otherwise he would have just lived with his dad forever because he didn't like to pay for anything. And so that night I went to bed early, as I always did. And he stayed up till God knows what time, partying with his friends. And he came up to bed. It was daylight. That's all I remember. And he was mad at me for some reason. I can't even recall. I do know, though, he shouldn't have been mad at me. Like, it was just, he was so drunk that he didn't know his left from right hand. Like, I mean, that's how drunk he was. And he was mad at me, and I was like, whatever, I'm going to go downstairs and sleep on the couch. So I went downstairs, and then he would come downstairs, and then he was upset because I wasn't upstairs in our bedroom. So then I would go back upstairs, and then he would get mad at me again. And this happened like 5 or 6 times. Like over the course, like this fight probably lasted like 2 hours. To the point where our roommate was up trying to kind of diffuse the situation. And even he was like, I don't know what his problem is. Like he kind of saw like he doesn't know what he wants type thing. Like, maybe you should sleep down here. And I don't know what transpired or what was said. Like, I do remember that I was trying to remain calm because I wasn't drunk. I was totally sober. He was drunk out of his mind, like, could not hardly walk. And he got so mad at me, he took me by my throat and shoved me up against the wall and pinned me against the wall. And that was the first time he ever laid hands on me. And I remember staring into his eyes, and it was just complete darkness. Like, that's all I remember, is just like staring into this person that like wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was no
Emotion.
nothing other than rage. And I don't know how long he held me there. Not like super long, because at that point our roommate stepped in and like pushed him off of me. And I ended up leaving, I think, bawling my eyes out. And that might have been the same time. Again, my memory is so bad. That might have been the same time. I'm pretty sure it was. I attempted to leave, and he came out chasing me. I got in my car, and he started kicking in my door with his foot. And I was just like, I got to get the heck out of here. And so I went down the road to his dad's house, crying, obviously. It was like a mile down the road. And I remember getting out of my car and looking at my car and thinking, oh my God, what am I going to tell my parents? Because he had literally kicked in the side of my car so bad, it looked like somebody hit it with another vehicle. And I pulled up there to his dad's house, and his dad and stepmom came out, and they were like, what the heck happened? And I told them, and they're like, oh my gosh. So I stayed there for the night and went back to sleep, like, because I was crying so much and I was just exhausted. I went back over to our house later that next day, and he was still asleep. Like, mind you, our room looked like a tornado went through it from him throwing stuff all over the place, like just acting like a crazy person. So finally, I just so happened, it was like 6 p.m. by the time he woke up the next day. And I just so happened to be walking in our room when he woke up. And he's like sitting on the edge of our bed and just looking at the room like, what the heck happened? And I remember just looking at him because I was so mad and so disgusted. I just remember saying, oh, you think this is bad? I go, you haven't seen anything yet. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, come look at my car. And he doesn't remember anything.
He blacked out.
He blacked out. He doesn't remember choking me and pitting me up against the wall. He doesn't remember fighting. And he doesn't remember causing $3,000 worth of damage on my vehicle. I had to take it to the body shop and lie to them and say I got hit by another vehicle so my insurance would cover it. Oh, and guess who paid for the deductible? Me. I think that's where we should stop for the first time.
Okay. God, I'm so mad. So for now, that is Walter's Wives and Woes.
Bye.